much.
Lovely. Thank you, Casey, for that. And thank you for the housekeeping. And welcome to everyone for this day 3 of this first online community housing festival. And thanks to the team for putting this together. And thanks for the housekeeping, Casey. I kind of, though, do miss those days of getting together when we did the housekeeping. I used to love the fire talk. I don't know why. There's something about that. I quite enjoy doing the fire talk with people. And also at this moment in any event, you'd have that moment with people rushing in the back with their little conference brochure, perhaps sitting down and realising they're actually in the wrong room, and then off they go again. So we don't have that now. It's just virtual clicks in and out, and it's all a bit silent and all a bit strange. But anyway, it's a moment where we are in time. But actually, with that note, I actually just want to show you an experience. I actually did chair an event the other week. And of course, people can interact as much as they want to. And it's quite right. If people want to leave their cameras off, it's entirely fine. You might well be doing other things. We might just be in the background and you might be listening to us. It's absolutely fine. But it is a plea for me as the chair for that interaction piece, because the event I ran the other week, I will share with you, all the screens were off. And I was sitting there thinking, gosh, I've got no feedback. Are they nodding? Are they drinking their tea? Have they gone away? What are they doing? So a plea from me as the chair, folks, this is your event. So please do interact. And make the most of it this morning, and it will help us. So as Katie said, we've got the chat function up on the go, so the team at the Welsh Cooperative Centre are going to be keeping an eye on that for me as well, and we will do our best as we go through. So this session then is titled More Than Housing, Regeneration Through Critical Housing, and we have a stellar panel of international guests lined up for you today. When I say international, I do mean from across the border in England and Scotland, but that's fantastic. And what I'm going to do in a moment, I'm just going to actually just invite each of our 3 speakers just to say hello and who they are. And then we'll then go back round each of those guests who will then talk to us. And then we will follow that by a traditional Q&A session at the end. So that's the format for this particular event. I thought what I'll do though, before I start, is just talk a bit about ourselves. So Casey's just talked about the Nationwide Foundation, and we've had a great relationship with the team at the Welsh Cooperative Centre for a number of years now. And we are currently the co-funders alongside the Welsh Government of their programme. It's called Communities Creating Homes. And what we're aiming to do with this particular programme work is really to put on the map firmly and squarely community housing as a real alternative solution for people for affordable homes. That's the plan of what ourselves and the Welsh Government are aiming to do. And it's something I know we've been working with the team for a number of years. And in fact, I'm now looking at Joe in my screen, I can see, and it goes back longer than this period of funding. It goes back for some years now. It's going about 6-7 years we've had the relationship with the team. And it's a great group of people. And I would urge all people, if you want to carry on that conversation and learn more about it, then I'll invite you to get in touch with the team at their website. So actually, let's just go around now and make sure we can just double check I can see all our panel are here. So I'm going to just ask James from the team Hastings just to say hello to everyone. So James, I can just see, yes, there you are in the middle of my screen.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me. My name is James Leathers. I'm the director of Heart of Hastings Community Land Trust. As the name tells you, we're based in Hastings. We came into being probably 2016, and I'll be talking a little bit more about what we do as a land trust and hopefully share some ideas and get some inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Let's go up to Mike now.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and likewise, thank you to the guys in Wales Co-op Centre for inviting us to participate. I'm the Chief Executive of Dumfries and Galloway Small Communities Housing Trust, and we're an organisation that provides support to community-led housing projects across the south of Scotland. And I'm going to be talking a bit about our engagement with town centre projects, in particular with a wider regeneration impact, and particularly the Mid-Steeple Quarter project in Dumfries.
Lovely, thank you, Mike. And then to Sophie.
Hi everyone, I'm Sophie Haggerty. I guess you would say Haggerty. And I'm the Communications and Campaigns Officer at the National CLT Network. And we're so happy we could be part of everything today. and I'll be talking more about our new research, partially funded by Nationwide Foundation, about the value for money of community-led housing. Thanks so much.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Sophie. So there's our panel for all of you. And I'm sure all three of them will be happy to be contacted outside of this event if you want to carry on the conversation with them directly, individually. So this session, as we said, is more than housing. So I talked in my introduction about affordable homes, but community housing does much more than just that. And that's what this session is going to be looking at in the wider sense. So we're going to go straight to start with James. James is going to be talking about community organising. Over to you, James, in your time, sir.
Thank you, Gary. How long have I got for this? I want to kind of give a chance for questions and everything, but how?
I think there's a good 20 minutes or so. So.
Okay, and we'll have a bit of dialogue then.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are a community land trust, and actually we have much wider objects than producing affordable homes, which is a challenge in its own right, which we can talk about. So a very kind of core principle at Heart of Hastings is we talk about a bottom-up development, and what that's at the heart of all of that is that people are connected to places. So traditional regeneration has talked about kind of looking at the built assets, and they get developed by development companies and all the professionals that gathers together in order to do that. And at the same time, you may have some people engagement, possibly got effective consultation around that, but other schemes that maybe aren't actually connected to the buildings, as it were, that kind of they may be health initiatives. The two aren't joined together, and we just think that that's fundamentally wrong. And connecting people with the place is our starting point. And so how can I kind of illustrate that really? So what I'm trying to say, as a land trust, we aren't just about developing buildings. So our first project that we've achieved in Hastings was to take a unused office building in the heart of town and turn that into 4 affordable flats. And but we have much wider ambitions about other things than that. And the journey for actually even just creating that that outcome involves so much else. And our biggest ambition was a land in a part of Hastings called the Ore Valley, which are 2 of the poorest neighbourhoods in the southeast. They don't feel like that. They're actually very nice places to live in terms of environment. The housing quality is good on the whole, but crime is low, but unemployment, intergenerational unemployment, low educational attainment, and low health indicators are enough to make those 2 neighbourhoods in that area. It kind of jostles around a little bit, but they basically are the poorest neighbourhoods outside of London in the southeast. And we've had a number of regeneration initiatives in Hastings. I'm sure people have experienced that in terms of kind of what I would say central government kind of initiated things. So that has come with money, but none of those underlying statistics have really changed for those neighbourhoods. And in the heart of that area, there was a piece of land that used to be a power station on it. It was an oil power station, then became a coal one. And it is now your classic kind of brownfield site, contaminated, terribly expensive to develop, not particularly large. And so trying to get private developers to do anything on that and build houses is, without subsidy, would be impossible. And so we came up with a scheme. So we were doing that element of what I was talking there about in terms of the development company activity to get affordable, eco-friendly homes built on that. We came up with a plan for 80 homes on that site. But it started with our bottom-up development team, our BUD team, who were based on that site for 3 years. We got a license to occupy that site for 3 years. And in that process of that time, we did quite a lot of campaign work. People were doing their own particular interest in terms of research, in terms of the environment on that site. It was a real privilege to go to those meetings. They met on a Wednesday and a Saturday religiously for those 3 years, and watching that group develop its own internal kind of democracy and governance, its own rules of behaviour, it was a real privilege to watch that develop. And there were a number of little projects that they got off the ground in terms of levered-in funding. I think there was, over that 3 years, they brought about 20,000 into that area. We're doing small kind of projects, either around the environment or things for young people, growing a vegetable kind of a project on that side of things. And we always talked about our development having within it what we called an organisation workshop. Has anyone ever come across this concept of organisation workshop? Okay, I hope, kind of. Okay, so I'm going to leave some links, or I'll send through some links for you to kind of get a fuller picture on all of this. But organisation workshop is an example of community organising that has come from originally from Latin America, and was pioneered and used in the developing world, most notably in Southern Africa. And it's a concept that basically starts with bringing a load of people together, who, in our case, in this side of thing, that we are trying to reach people from marginalised backgrounds or excluded economically, and providing them with a project, something that had there to be organised. So in this case of our project up in Ore Valley, it was to create the first building on the site, which would later become the communal hall of the site, using techniques of modern means of construction. And in that project, so we were going to run something, we hoped to run that for 3 months, and involve about 100 people in that. And the concept is that you provide the tools, you provide the expertise, and the materials, but what you don't provide is the organisation. That is what develops in those 3 months. And we never had the opportunity to do that on that site. But we did have an opportunity to do it in the Observer building, which is a building in the centre of Hastings, which has been derelict for 40 years. It was the place where the printing presses of all the local kind of press, the local Observer, was based. It has a number of other buildings around it as well that were part of that, what we refer to as the Parsons Empire. But it's now a derelict building, and it has a history of being bought by developers in the interest of putting a planning application on it, watching its price increase, but no intention of ever developing what that planning application was about. So it's a form of extraction of wealth out of Hastings. And just over, well, coming up to nearly 2 years ago, there was an opportunity for a partner organisation to buy that building and put it into community use. So they bought it at the start of January 1919, and the first project that they did in there was an organisation workshop, which was to build the thing to be organised. There were 3 things to be organised. There was a construction element to that, which was office partitions for the first floor in that building. There was also the project of documenting the whole of what the exercise that was happening. We ran this one for 1 month, and also throughout that, the first 3 days we provided breakfast and lunch, but after that it was for the team themselves to provide that for themselves. So as I said, I was there at the start of all of this when we gathered just over 60 people into a room with our facilitating team there. We invited Ivan Labra, who has been the Chilean director of a lot of the projects that happened in Southern Africa, to start the organisation workshop. So we were in this room where we said, the tools are here, there are expertise here in this room to help you do this. There is something here to organise. get on with it. We do not talk to individuals, we only talk to groups. That was the only kind of thing at the start of that. And that became the month of the organisation workshop and the observer building. And it was an amazing kind of project. I wasn't part of the facilitators team. I was kind of one step back, as it were, in terms of, but our office is right next to where all of this was happening. So I felt very much immersed in it. And it was just watching the effect of that on the participants. We didn't retain them all. We probably saw 37 of people finish through the project at the end. So what they did produce, and this is, I can screen share this, but I'm trying to find where to put it now. But it's basically, they produced a magazine that was an insert in a local printed paper, free paper here, the Hastings Independent. They took up an 8-page insert in that, which I'll send to you, and that's all right. I really encourage you to read it. It's their testimony of the project, and I hope it gives that testimony of what it is to give people agency. So that's one kind of example of what I would say our community organising work and putting people. So before anything physical happened on that building, before there were any planning applications, I think it was important for us and our partners that we work with that we invited people from unemployed backgrounds to come and do a project that was so different from their normal work coach experience on the benefits that they receive. And as that project happened, some people got jobs while they were there, but it was more about the transformation of kind of individuals. When I talked about being gathered in that first room, there was one woman who had a panic attack and wanted to leave. When we did the celebration at the end, she was adamant that she wanted to stand at the microphone and address everyone that was gathered there and say how much she'd enjoyed the project. So the change in her confidence was just outstanding. There were young men on there who really struggled to articulate what they were feeling or wanted to say, or work in a group environment, and would have kind of temper tantrums really, but seeing their kind of whole body language change in those weeks, and from kind of hunched over to kind of standing up and with kind of heads held high, and a bounce in their strides. It was, you saw the transformation on people. So that was a very kind of a learning experience for us in terms of a proof of concept that it could be done. We took it from Marsh Farm, where the first organisation workshop in Britain was done. Similar kind of concept and approach on that side of things. So as I said, we ran that second one in Hastings. We learned a lot from it. As I said, we didn't retain everybody, and the drop-off was quite immediate, really, in terms of some people just decided this wasn't for them. The nature of the project, as you can imagine, it was 4 weeks. The first week was chaotic on that side. People are not organised. They have to learn how to organise. And my perspective, perhaps, to some extent, is just only one perspective on that side of thing, but you can imagine I was quite nervous about the whole health and safety issues, and just trusting people but I was also worried about, is this going to come together? Are they going to organise themselves? And they just went through that process of realising they had something to achieve and how to organise that. And I hope that their testimony in that magazine that I'll send to you really shows that in a variety of different ways. And I hope as well, not in a kind of airbrushed kind of, it's all kind of good news, because that process was a difficult process, even in those 4 weeks. And there were a lot of risks in that. And you can imagine there were areas of conflict that people had to address. But it felt something quite invigorating and exciting to be part of. The point that I kind of want to make talking about that project, and I'm happy to kind of answer questions and talk more about all of that, both here and outside of that on that side, because I don't think we can exhaust that subject today. But that's led us as a community land trust to very much have what we call a community organising element to the work that we do. So it's actually, so I've talked about the Ore Valley project because the landowner, the local regeneration Quango, wouldn't give us the land or sell us the land for a price for us that we could, that project is unlikely ever to happen. I'm not saying that it's completely won't ever happen, because I don't think private developers can ever bring that site into, not without significant subsidy, but which is possible, but unlikely. But we have other projects going on at the moment, and we do that a lot in kind of collaboration with other partners. So the company that I talked about that bought the Observer building, we are now a third owner of. And we also have gone on to get a Heritage Action Zone bid, which we are one of 2 community organisations in the country doing that. It's usually led by local authorities, so our partnership is very much rooted in the community, and it's very different, I think, from others. A good illustration of that is we had our first meeting on that on the 2nd of April, which you'll remember is about kind of 2 or 3 weeks into the national lockdown, and in terms of kind of where the local authorities are at that, they've still got kind of embargoes on recruitment and haven't started their projects. I'm not saying that it's been easy to deliver this project in a COVID world and having to adapt all of the time on that, but we have been doing stuff. Because a large part of our project isn't just about the physical buildings, it's about people engagement, and so there are strands to put money into the Observer building to get that developed, but there's also our neighbourhood stories, our cultural programme around that side. They're just as important. They don't take as much chunks of money as such, but they are the real drivers of the legacy of that project. So there's no point in changing those buildings if you haven't talked about how your local community wants to reimagine its local high street. And that's been our experience of regeneration initiatives on the whole in Hastings. Has felt, as I said, a big divorcing between, oh, we're going to build a load of offices here, that will create employment, or we're going to build a road here and that sort of thing. And then there's kind of social care activities happening in the poorer neighbourhoods around things like anti-cessation smoking and that sort, but they're not connected to the uses of those buildings. And it'd be good to hear from you as well in terms of that. So we have this issue in the area of the town where we're working at the moment, White Rock. So even an example of where I've said where we do the 4 flats on that street, which is a relatively kind of a small project. We are letting those at affordable rents, and so as an asset for us, we don't actually kind of realise the increase in the wealth on that building. What happens is that people around that start to do that, and actually kind of it has an impact on raising the property prices around us, and all of the activity that we are doing, engaged in, will have that effect. And the danger that comes with that is gentrification, that you lose the anchoring of the what makes that part of town quite an interesting and diverse neighbourhood, and has a there are so many examples all over the country where the kind of like the first wave, if you like, of a neighbourhood emerging out of, want of a better description, deprivation, is a kind of artistic kind of vibrancy, because the properties aren't in great condition and people are occupy them at low rents. But as that changes and people want to extract the wealth out of that, people are priced out of that. And so that's our role. So if I was to sum up where we are and all our partners as a land trust, is we are the long-term vision for bringing assets into community ownership that lock them into community ownership, and therefore lock them into this principle of providing affordable tenure. And that applies to housing, it applies to incubation spaces and workspaces. And it's also about creating an ethos of a connection between all of the occupants of these premises that give something back to their community. So our selection criteria on our for our 4 flats, the fundamental ones there would be as you expected, in terms of having a local connection and an evidenced housing need. But we also talked about an enthusiasm and a contribution to communal living. And And that's quite a hard thing to kind of assess about people, and it's hard to bring that into being in sense, because people's lives take over. They well, I say take over, there's lots happening in life that can distract you from that, not because you don't want to do it, but because life is hard to make it happen. And so we have to facilitate that to happen. So that's another element of the community organising that we do. I'll just kind of finish as well that community organising is quite an important part for us in terms of generating revenue. So there are projects that we can do across the town. So we work with a local housing association who normally just employ a market research firm to come along and do their satisfaction surveys. They used our bottom-up development team to do a doorstep engagement on that. And then from that, they said, look, that worked really well. We got much higher kind of return and intelligence back from that. We'd like to commission you to do a proper community organising project for a whole, probably 18 months. We did 6 months of that, and then COVID hit, and they pulled the project, unfortunately. But we are doing one in St Leonard's around in the Safer Streets programme, which is the first example of a government department talking about community organising in those terms. They've got a lot to learn. It was a delayed project because of COVID, so effectively we are being asked to community organise in 7 months around measures to reduce acquisitive crime. But that's not deterring us from our kind of the process of how we will stick to our principles. So there is a theory behind community organising in terms of how you do this, which is very much about listening to people and then challenge. I don't really kind of want to kind of give you a kind of long lecture, really. I know we're all in Zoom, and it'd be great to be in person. Gary, I got to do the fire thing the other week, actually last week, and say we had a blended event in the Observer building, and it was quite nice to say. It was great to have people together, but I'd love to have to, if we're having a plenary discussion, that's fine, but I'm happy to answer any questions on that now, if I've sparked any kind of or even just to clarify what I've been talking about.
Thank you very much, James, for that. Actually, in terms of time, you're pretty much spot on, sir. So thank you for that. Excellent. Nothing's come up in the chat, so we'll move it forward. Though I've got Leonie here from Swansea. We can see they're asking about the sums of money. Do you start with a complete blank slate? Can you say that, James, in the chat line?
I would, sorry, just to clarify, are we talking about housing or the community organising? So, well, in terms of where do we get our money from in terms of to get projects done? Well, really, it's not that different from other housing development, really. So it's a combination of capital that you may have that we derive probably from 2 main sources. Grants. So we did have a bit of community housing fund to do our 50,000. It's not a huge amount of money for the 4 flats, and we did also a community investment on that. So we did a local community investment offer that raised us the money that was able to purchase the site in the first place. That's what set the project rolling, and then you borrow, and that's what. So it's borrowing finance that kind of makes housing happen, and there are a number of community kind of banks out there. So we use Ecology Bank, but there's others out there, Unity, and that's not an exhaustive list off the top of my head, sorry, but you know, one thing about housing as an asset is that it's in demand, and you will generate rent off that, even at affordable rates on that side of things, and it's a safe bet for lenders, really. So that's how we did that project. In terms of the Ore Valley project, we would have done again an example of community investment that we wanted to do, which would have been with tax relief, because it was about community assets in there and not housing, because you can't do tax relief around housing on community investments. Large amounts of grant that we would have hoped would have come through and spent from the Community Housing Fund, which was massively underspent and is up in the air at the moment in terms of clarity, or it is in England anyway, and borrowing. So that's how we do it, really. In terms of the community organising, it's usually grant-led, or, as we happen to have with the Housing Association, a commission.
Lovely. Thank you very much, James. Thank you for that. I'm going to move us forward then. I'm going to take us up to Scotland now, to Mike, who's going to talk to us about enabling community housing across Scotland. Over to you, Mike.
Okay, thank you, Gary. I am going to PowerPoint at you, if you don't mind.
Not at all. Mixes it up.
Okay.
The technology's working. Look at that. Fantastic.
It's working. I'm glad I was about to ask you that. Okay, so just going to try and move your faces out the road. There you go. Quick overview of who we are. Our organisation has been around since 2006 and was formed as a response to a piece of work that Shelter undertook in rural southwest Scotland, identifying a shortfall in affordable housing supply and a need for communities to address that. So we support and enable community housing within the context, the Scottish context of community ownership of land and assets and land reform legislation. We're about targeting localised needs, but repopulation is a big issue in our area, and we work across a range of strategic partnerships, but at a national and local level. But in particular, a strategic partnership with the local authority here is very important to us. The policy and funding context, I could probably require a completely separate session to talk about land reform legislation in Scotland, but a few takeouts for us there that underpin our work in particular are the Community Empowerment Act, which facilitates community asset transfer of public buildings and public land, the Land Reform Act, in particular the creation of the Scottish Land Fund, and Community Right to Buy, which affords rights to communities to seek to take ownership of private assets, and in particular that became pertinent to urban communities from 2016. So the urban side of this is quite new to us, in spite of having a well-developed culture of community ownership. The bulk of our projects at the moment are being delivered through the Rural Housing Fund, which significantly for us is the only Scottish Government grant stream that's available to community organisations. It ends in March. We're hoping that after the Scottish parliamentary elections in May, there will be a second iteration of it. But as things stand, we don't have an urban community-led housing fund, and that's something that we want to work towards. One other point that's been significant to us is that the local authority in Dumfries and Galloway have ring-fenced all income from council tax on second homes as a grant stream that communities can apply into, which has been really beneficial for us in terms of kind of bridging the funding gap on projects. This slide is really just to tell you that the way we work as an organisation is to embed ourselves in a community from the very outset of an idea, the availability of an asset, or just the perception from a community organisation that they want to address housing as an issue, all the way through to projects being delivered and beyond. And at the moment, we're working with around 15 community organisations across the south of Scotland. We have been funded, I'm just saying this because Gary's listening, but we've been funded like the guys in Wales since 2018, supporting our community-led housing work. And the support from the Nationwide Foundation has also been invaluable to us in terms of helping our evolution as an organisation, and that's going to kind of climax in our becoming South of Scotland community housing. So we're going to rebrand, hopefully at some point before the end of this year. One of the primary reasons for that is to take the small communities out of our brand. We've just joined the Chic project, which is an EU project that Sophie would be able to tell you a lot more about than we can at this stage, but we're excited to be part of that, and that relates to our support to the Dumfries project. And I'm allowed to tell you as of right now that the embargo has just lifted around the National Lottery's Emerging Futures funding, and we're about to embark on a project called A Model for Post-COVID Living, and that's going to involve an architect coming into our organisation for 6 months to help us do that. We've also just had a new development agency, economic development agency, establish in the south of Scotland from the 1st of April. So we're looking now to build a strategic relationship with that organisation. So I'm going to talk initially about a couple of projects that we've done that are town centre related, but more rural, and then I'll come on to mid-steeple quarter. Firstly, and the intention is that these projects are aligned to the wider kind of regeneration impact agenda, if you like, but based upon community-led housing. Wigton on the Machars Peninsula in Galloway, Western Dumfries and Galloway, is Scotland's book town. Has very high visitor numbers as a result of that. We worked with the community organisation there relative to an identification of a demand for particularly family housing in the town, and that aligned to the Bank of Scotland withdrawing from the community in 2017, and the community deciding that they wanted to address the availability of this prominent building within the town centre. And it's the one project that we've done that has implemented community right to buy, whereby the community registered an interest in the property and gave them a preemptive right where they were struggling to engage with Lloyds Banking Group in London, and led to, through the Scottish Land Fund, the property being acquired. The project has been on site for about 8 weeks, and just to illustrate there that it's been a pretty complex drawing together of funding from a range of different sources, and that's very often the case with our projects. This is a property, for us, it will become 2 residential units, so 1 big family home in what was the bank manager's accommodation but has been empty since the early 1980s, and then an accessible new unit to the rear, so an opportunity for an intergenerational relationship. And the bank itself is going to become a community owned and run bunkhouse as a response to a demand for more affordable visitor accommodation in the town. Smallish project in a more rural community, but quite a large impact in terms of regeneration. Similar project is in a community called Whithorn, which is also a very visited, high tourist numbers on account of its heritage and relationships with St Ninian and the entry of Christianity to the United Kingdom. Here we had a hotel right on the high street in the town centre, which has been derelict for in excess of 30 years, although it had been maintained on the outside by a regeneration, slightly pointless regeneration grant that kind of tarted up the outside and left the internal shell of the building derelict, done by the private owner. And had been a real frustration to the local community for many, many years, because they simply couldn't envisage there being a solution to dealing with this building. But fortunately, we've been able to work with them to make that happen. So the building itself has a pretty large site to the rear of it, and by using the Scottish Land Fund, the community have taken ownership of this building in August. We have the capital package in place and are just waiting at the moment to get our planning consent, which will involve creating 2 large family homes. Project is next to the local school, and then building 2 further new houses on the site to the rear. This community organisation also own a shop and a cafe and a visitor centre opposite this building, and have also just taken ownership of their town hall, which is going to be a multi-purpose community and business and heritage space a boxing club of all things as well. So it's creating a kind of hub of community-led regenerative activity in the town. One I'm just going to mention briefly, because we're very proud of this project, is the Close Burn Passive House, which is a slightly more rural project, I guess, but on a gap site in a community in Upper Nithsdale, which are the first community-owned passive certified homes in Scotland, and where we're very pleased to say shortlisted last week for the SURF Award, Scottish Urban Regeneration Forum Award for Housing Project of the Year. And again, the regeneration impacts of this project have related to bringing families into the community, sustaining local services, supporting the school, supporting local businesses within a fragile economy. Okay, so Dumfries. The project in Dumfries, the Mid-Staple Quarter, relates to an endeavour to enact wholesale urban regeneration within a block of the urban core via the process of community ownership. So the highlighted area you can see is the Mid-Staple Quarter master plan area. Dumfries is the largest town in south of Scotland, the regional capital in Dumfries and Galloway, and the town centre is in decline, as is the case with many places, I guess, at this point in time. The project was initially catalysed by a group called the Stove Network, who are an artist-led community development trust who had taken occupation of an empty property in the town centre, and actually over a period of about 7 years enacted a discussion and consultation and community engagement around the idea of what role the regional centre and its town centre should be playing in the 21st century as a market town. The analogy there is a market town which no longer has a market. And this work over a prolonged period of time led to the formation of Dumfries High Street Limited, which trades as a Mid-Staple Quarter, which is a community benefit society, which at this point in time has 400 to 500 members, and really catalysed and focused that community engagement around repurposing and repositioning the town centre. And Dumfries was suffering from a range of issues that are really common to towns across the UK, particularly relative to high street decline, retail decline, absentee ownership, properties whereby the owners have no vested interest in doing anything, depopulation, etc. So all of these things we're seeking to address, and we've been engaged by that group to provide support since about 2018, and I'm going to come on to the project related stuff in some subsequent slides to give you a bit more of a kind of sense of what the project looks like. But we had worked initially with them over a period of time to help build up to the project to the point we're at now, whereby we're ready to go on site. We have a master plan which has been adopted by the council within the local development plan, so has a planning status, and we've built up the business case, and we've reached the point now that this year the community organisation now has a full-time manager, Scott Mackay, which has shifted our engagement on the project a little bit. But over that lead-in period, we had worked with Matt Baker, the strategic director, really providing support across all aspects of the project. And now the project is beginning to take shape. So reverting back to the original image, this is the transposing of the Mid-Staple Quarter master plan, and relates to what we intend to do, which is a mixed-use development of community-led housing, repopulating, bringing people back into the urban core to create vibrancy, but also a mix of workspaces, co-working, office spaces, studio spaces for professionals. Project is very heavily driven by creative professionals and the presence of a lot of artists in the town and surrounding area. and also various public services coming into the mix as well. The first building in the mix is the oven, which was at the upper end of that row. The oven is the only property within the block of 8 that was in public ownership, belonged to Dumfries and Galloway Council, and we secured ownership of that property via the Community Asset Transfer process, Community Empowerment Act that I mentioned earlier. Transferred the property for £1 to Mid-Steeple Quarter. This development, which really we hope is going to be a landmark as the first stage in the programme, will be 7 flats in community ownership rented at intermediary affordable tenure. There's going to be co-working space, office space, and a range of studio spaces for creative professionals. And there's also going to be an apartment linked to a semi-industrial studio space in which there will be an artist in residence across the duration of delivery. So that's been delayed slightly by COVID. There's a partial demolition happening, so that contract will start soon, and the full build will go on site early 2021. The next 2 properties, 113 to 117 High Street, have just been taken ownership. So I don't know if any of you have been familiar with the history of Mid-Steeple Quarter, but these are the properties that ended up at auction in London, and the community crowdfunding for raised £80,000 across the course of 3 weeks on properties that had been valued at £20,000 each, and ended up not getting a bid in at auction. Since that auction in 2018, these properties have subsequently changed hands 2 more times and have just been purchased by the community for £250,000. So, albeit derelict properties that nobody had any intention of using, it illustrates how difficult it is for the community organisation to keep up with market forces and compete within a commercial property environment. But the good news is that they now own these. There's a feasibility study and business plan being done for these properties via the Scottish Land Fund, so they will be the next phase in the development. And the 2 properties that sit in between these, 111 and 121 High Street, we have just completed a feasibility study on and have made an application to the Scottish Land Fund to buy these properties. So there would be a kind of cohesive block of 4 in a row. The master plan affords round about 60 to 70 properties. This is subject to change. We've been in a bit of a race really to get the phase 1 development point 1 on the map, the oven on site, and going beyond that, we are now taking stock to work with the board of the community organisation and the community to develop a more cohesive vision for the remaining housing phases beyond the oven. And this is, we're pleased to say, is going to be underpinned in retaining as many of these homes in community ownership as we can for rental, on working towards an intergenerational living environment. And we're about to start doing some work with an organisation called Housing Lynn, so some of you might be familiar with, to look at the tenure models around that. Something that James mentioned earlier on around the kind of ideas of mutually supported participatory community, and trying to work out how we make that work in practical terms. Green development, there's a huge piece of work ongoing across the whole development at the moment around the presence of an aquifer that runs beneath Dumfries town centre, very deep down, in endeavouring to drill down to that and create a source of hot water across the whole development. So that's quite an interesting element of the low carbon green aspect of the development. So ultimately, this is what we're hoping to achieve, which is wholesale regeneration, community ownership, underpinned by community-led housing and a range of other community-led uses. And I will stop there.
Thank you very much, Mike, for that. I might just let you come out of the presentation. Just to check that, is in terms of that high profile project, it's definitely, the Scottish government are definitely watching carefully what happens, aren't they, in terms of the progress that they're making in Dumfries?
Yes, and I mean, I think it's fair to say there's a huge level of support. Politicians are watching the project. I mean, I think not just in Scotland but beyond, but politicians are watching very carefully. The Scottish government, and the stage 1 development in the oven is being funded primarily by the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund, which is Scottish government's main regeneration fund, which is funding everything in that building that's not housing. So that's where our challenge lies. And the new development agency are putting capital into the project as well. So it's seen as strategically important to the economy of the region. So yeah, the support is there, but what we don't have is the financial support for the housing elements.
Okay, thank you very much. Just got a question from Jasmine, I think to you about repeating the tenure model that you named at the end there. I'm just trying to...
For
Jasmine there, just to clarify, that's just...
Yeah. Did you say lean? You said some of you might like to look into the tenure model of lean or something?
Oh, no, there's an organisation called Housing Lin, L-I-N, yeah, who specialise in models around housing for older people. So, yeah, they're going to help us get more of a sense of the practicalities of our intergenerational modelling.
Lovely. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move now on to Sophie now. Sophie's now going to build upon what we've had in terms of the rich information that we've had both there from James and Mike of 2 great examples of regeneration, and now perhaps can put some understanding, some metrics onto it and some numbers about value in it more. So Sophie, you're going to talk about value for money, a piece of work that I know just recently been launched. Over to you.
Mm-hmm. Sure, so I'm going to try to share my screen, but just my presentation so you can't see my notes. So tell me when I've done that.
Yeah, that's just coming through. Yeah, great. It's just coming through now, yes.
So even if I minimize this, what happens? No, then it minimizes for you as well, right?
Yeah.
All right, so I'll just use my phone for that. So again, thanks everyone for inviting the National CLT Network to this. We've been working really hard for the past 10 years, and we've seen the pipeline of community-led housing basically explode in England, and we're so happy that it's really taking root in new ways in Wales as well. So for anyone who doesn't know, the National CLT Network, that's our logo there on the left. We're the official charity supporting community land trusts in England and Wales, and we're a membership body representing over 300 CLTs. And together, we estimate those CLTs have about 7,000 homes that they plan to deliver in the next 5 years, so by 2025. And also, 2020 marks our 10-year anniversary as an organization. And during that time, there's been a 10-fold growth of the CLT movement. It started with just about 30 baby CLTs in England. And now in England and Wales, we think it's over 340 that we specifically know about. Of course, there are more being formed every day. So through our partnership with other organizations in the larger community-led housing movement, we're part of this other organization called Community-Led Homes. Their logo is on the right there. I guess it's ours too, which among other things operates a network of regional enabling hubs, including the Wales Cooperative Centre. So that's sort of how we fit in together. And we're also part of some partnerships like the Chic Project, which Mike mentioned in Northwest Europe, and a new umbrella action group that's to promote housing diversification in the building industry. So a little bit more about CLTs and linking it to Wales. CLTs are set up and run by local people to develop and manage homes and other assets that their community wants and needs. The CLT is a long-term steward of the home, ensuring they're genuinely affordable based on the earnings in the local area, not just for now, but forever, in perpetuity. And if you want to look at the legal definition, the statutory definition of community land trust, which is not a legal form in itself, but in order to call yourself one, you must be set up just to benefit a defined community. You must be not-for-profit, and you must, any profits you do make from community business must be put back into the community. And you must have local people living and working in the community, joining, leading, and taking part in all the activities. So I think it's just interesting to bring up this statutory definition, because you'll see it fits really nicely with the legal requirements of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in Wales that you've had since 2015, which is amazing, by the way. Maybe I should move there. And so CLTs can be a really interesting sort of tool to use to achieve those gains for future communities. And obviously the session is about what community-led housing can offer for regenerating communities above and beyond just housing. But when I was planning for this, I realized maybe community-led housing is a bit of a misnomer, because yeah, we're trying to create housing, but that's not even the half of it, really. We're looking to create homes, right? We're looking to make something with roots that has connections and is really based on relationships. And that's why I love that the Co-op Center's program is called Communities Creating Homes and Not Houses. And I'm so happy we could hear from what's going on in Hastings and in the south of Scotland about what happens when a group of people just kind of get together, they assess the problem, and they just start getting away at solving it, don't they, with the resources they have. But as we all know, that often requires some money. So most of us here, and a lot of people in the movement, we all understand more or less the benefits that community-led housing brings to a community. We understand the cohesion it brings, the access to resources, the sort of sustainable maintaining the community for the future. But in order to do that, it's really, really important that we can convince other people who don't know about it, who we need to get loans, grants, lands from. We need to explain to them what is the value on paper of this community-led housing. And that's why at the level of England, of course, we had the Community Housing Fund, and we really, to beef up our argument with the Treasury, we really needed to prove to them in the figures that they accept what value their investment would have for England. And obviously, while that only applies to England, the Community Housing Fund has been absolutely critical in building this pipeline of, I think it's over 23,000 homes. Dr. Tom Archer is on the call, I think. He can tell us for sure. But it's important to know that the Community Housing Fund, which is we don't have right now and we're working tirelessly to get renewed, had a capital aspect, it had a revenue aspect, but it also had an infrastructure aspect, which made this whole network of regional enabling hubs, an advice line, training, and certification and things like that. So all of that, if Wales really wants to grow the pipeline, we think something like that might be needed. And that's why this research is really interesting in the Welsh context as well. So in a few years, this could be the same situation of, tens of thousands of potential projects happening in Wales. So with the funding from the wonderful Nationwide Foundation, as I know Gary is listening, as well as Power to Change, we were able to commission research from Capital Economics to really dig into what is the value for money of community-led housing. We want it on paper for everyone to see. So we were able to, this is the report in the end. This is the front page. So Capital Economics is a consultancy firm that's really well respected in the capitals around the world, but especially Westminster respects what they do. And they were able to use the very same formulas, which they call, the Green Book, that Treasury and the government in Westminster use themselves to calculate value for money. So that's important that we're using their own language to convince them, basically, so to say. So, oops, I didn't mean to do that. So these economists, when they were trying to figure out what the value for money was, they looked at four things: literature that was already out there on community-led housing and on well-being and how to translate that into a monetary number. A very big survey that we did on community-led housing with a bunch of groups giving details of their schemes, and that included some Welsh groups, including the Bronflith Wellbeing Park CLT, and then interviews with a selection of people involved in different parts of the process to learn more. And also our big data set that we had through community-led homes. Okay, so all of that to be said, here's what the economists found. they just prove what we already knew, that community-led housing, the benefits far outweigh the costs. And here's like a very easy way to see it. The public costs, specifically putting in cash grants and land grants, really pay out for the community. And I'll go into that in detail now. But the sort of three key ingredients, sort of the secret sauce that sets community-led housing apart, that they found in this study, are additionality, affordability, and well-being. So additionality is really important. That basically means community-led housing is delivering homes that would not otherwise be happening, would not otherwise be developed for various reasons. So they're additional to the market. They're not taking up the space of other things in the market. It's through local knowledge and engagement, and mostly just sheer persistence, that the groups are making these sites happen and developing sites that wouldn't otherwise be developed. It might be that they're not accessible to other developers. It might be that they're really on a strange site or not worth it to a big developer, or they're in a floodplain. It could be anything, but basically they're just sitting there not being used. And we actually found that a lot of community-led housing unlocked sites that was earmarked for them was that they could only get, because they were community-led housing, as a gift from their local authority perhaps, or perhaps through rural exception sites. And sometimes just from local inclusion. At least 10% of the people that we talked to, or in our survey, said that the development of the site was stymied before due to local opposition, and their involvement is what kind of pushed past that barrier. And as you know, sometimes community-led housing and housing associations work together to put together projects, and I think there might be some housing associations here today, perhaps. And the local connection that the CLT brings and the local consent can mean all the difference in that project being approved eventually or not. So that's really, really important. And again, I just want to reiterate that community-led housing is not displacing other homes. It's adding more above and beyond what already would have been out there, because they're dealing with sites that other people just don't want to for many reasons. So the next key part in the secret sauce ingredient is affordability. Obviously, there are housing problems across all of Britain, and especially affordable housing. But as we look at the pipeline of the tenures we know about from the survey, and also in our greater data, we see that a huge amount of community-led housing is offering at social rent. So social rent is some of the lowest rent possible to pay. And then at least 80% of community-led housing is offering at affordable rents. So this is, again, creating very important housing in the market that is not necessarily attractive for everyone else to build. And the most important thing, as we said before, because of the definition of a CLT or community-led housing, is a lot of these things will stay affordable forever. That's in their covenant. It's not going to be affordable one day and privatized and put back into the general market the next. That's really key, and that's part of why they can deliver value for money over and over again throughout the decades. And then the third part I wanted to talk about is well-being. This is an area which can be hard to measure, obviously, and there are a lot of different ways to do it, but you can sort of look at the different effects of volunteering. You can look at the health outcomes and the housing benefits bill that wasn't paid as a result of the community housing. So it's a big role, and the fact that tenants are so often involved in their housing makes for a much better place to live. We also found in the survey that over 60% of the respondents were going to provide amenities above and beyond just housing. So here we have park and green space, renewable energy infrastructure, community hall, hub or library, workspace, sports facilities, shop, pub, or post office or other. And I won't give all examples of all of these because I know we're running short on time, but if you ever want to see examples of this, Community-Led Homes website can sort of give you insight into how these play out in different areas. So finally, what what actually money result comes out of this? So these three things, which are the secret sauce of community-led housing and what sets it apart from regular housing, it means, this is what the economists found, over a 10-year horizon, each £1 that, let's say, the government invests in community-led housing, they can expect 180 back in community benefit. And over 30 years, it's the same. So that's considered medium value for money. But that's just if you take a narrow definition of including what the Treasury very strictly counts as value for money. So it's really based on just the financials, just the economics of land uplift in the area and additions to the economy and things like that. But if you take a broader view, as I think the Welsh regulation might call you to, and you look at well-being in general and what it's bringing to the community with health, I mean, it can be so many things: health, engagement, you know, older people not needing the same, having built-in care systems, things like that. It's actually between £2 and £3 return on £1 over 10 years and then 30 years, which is a very high value for money. So that means if you include all these well-being things, when you put in £1 as an investment, you can expect $2.70 back in 10 years, and over 30 years, you can expect, you know, a trebling of the effect. So it's incredibly worthwhile. Not only is it nice to do, but it just pays off, and that's so important to be able to tell potential funders. So we also learned a lot of other interesting information in this survey, and especially for anyone who might be looking to grow the pipeline in Wales, this is what community land trusts, community-led housing get their money from. So a big part of it is loans, just as James said, but grants and also sort of the sale of assets or the gifting of assets in kind, like land from a local authority, are really what builds in that affordability from the beginning. And it's the grants that get people started way at the beginning. It can be a very, very small revenue grant just to start exploring. And that's what makes the difference for something to happen or not. And I included a little gross coronavirus picture here to remind me to say that Dr. Tom Archer, who is on the call, I believe, did, in February, he did a sort of a pipeline analysis of the community-led housing sector. And he found that there were about 23,000 or a little bit over 23,000 units of housing planned. And then after the coronavirus, obviously we wanted to know how that was affecting the pipeline. So he actually re-examined that in the past few weeks. And most interestingly, he found that the number of projects planned and the number of units planned didn't actually decrease. All that really changed massively was the time of delivering it. But the thing that had a much, much bigger impact was the fact that the community housing fund outside of London ended in England. And that had a much bigger impact than coronavirus. So I think that just really speaks to how that essential grant funding at the beginning makes such a big difference, more than coronavirus even. So that's most of what I have to say, because I want to leave time for questions, and I want to make sure we can talk about what you want to talk about. So thanks very much, and I will also send a link right now of the report in the chat.
Lovely, thank you very much, Sophie, for that information, and it's great that you're going to be able to share that slide, because I'm sure some people will want to take some time after the event to have a look through that. So I'll let you just click off and we can then go into our Q&A session. So we're running fairly good to time, which is brilliant. There's some questions that have come up in the chat line. So I'm happy to be led by that, but equally, there's all other ways of communicating now in terms of using Zoom. And I know between Joe and Casey, you'll prompt me if I miss anything as we go through. So I guess when I've been listening to lots of that information, one of the things that does draw the thing together is that thing called money, in terms of making it work for people, which is good that's been raised. And Sophie's just been there talking about the Community Housing Fund, which only relates to England. But I know, Mike, in your talk, you talked about the Rural Housing Fund being instrumental up there, but there's another fund up there. And so Robert's asked a question about the Scottish Land Fund, which you didn't mention, about what role that's played, and also the local development agencies. And I assume Robert's question there was in regard when you were talking about the mid-steeple quarter project?
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, the Scottish Land Fund, which is an instrument of the land reform legislation, is a pot of £10 million a year that community organisations can apply to by presenting a business case to take ownership of land or buildings. And the current Scottish Land Fund, like the Rural Housing Fund, ends in March, but it's just in its final round of application just now. So it's very important, and I think that it's played a role in every single one of our projects, whereby we'll target the land fund to acquire the asset and other forms of funding to deliver the housing. Interesting with the Scottish Land Fund, the most recent land fund has aligned to urban communities being afforded the same powers. So prior to 2016, urban communities couldn't bid into the Scottish Land Fund, and the impact of that translating rural land values to urban land values is suddenly the £10 million is clearly nowhere near enough. And if you were to look at one single project in Edinburgh where land values are sky high, £10 million could disappear very quickly indeed. So there is a commitment to renew the Scottish Land Fund into the new Parliament by the current government, but you know, those of us who are working in the sector feel that needs to increase. We're in the very final round of application now, and there's £7 million worth of application for £2 million remaining, so it's not enough. Just quickly mention the Development Agency. As I said, the South of Scotland Development Agency came into being in April, right in the middle of the pandemic. So it's, you know, where their focus is going to be around community ownership and relationships with community-led housing, we don't quite know yet, because everything they've been doing has been very much about economic recovery response thus far. But they have put large sums of money into Mid-Steeple Quarter and into a project called Line and Moor, which is going to be the biggest buyout of land in the south of Scotland. So far they're putting their money where their mouth is, and hopefully that will continue.
Lovely, thank you, Mike. Got a question coming in from Keith for Sophie, for you there as well. I don't know, can you see the chat line then, in the chat function?
Yep.
Then? So one question of language there. So.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we should strengthen the Wales of vibrant culture and thriving Welsh language element of the Well-being of Future Generations Act when considering CLTs in the more rural Welsh-speaking areas? This is a concern. Some of these areas, the language is being diluted. More specific. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I think it's up to those communities to decide what they want. But I certainly think that, you know, a CLT, like I said, is just a tool that you can use to do a lot of things. And it's I mean, the only requirement is that it has to be nonprofit, and it has to be focused on delivering what a community wants and helping a community. So if what that community wants is to preserve the Welsh language and culture, of course, that could be their main activities. And it doesn't have to only be housing. It can be above and beyond, or maybe they have, you know, an artist in residence in the housing that is a Welsh author or something like that. So I think that that's something to really be explored, and thinking within the box of housing is actually quite limiting. So that's a brilliant idea, but it would depend on what that community wanted. And
that's for you, for Mike, because Mike, you talked about some of your projects where things have started from so the Mid-Steeple Quarter starts from a group of artists coming together. It doesn't, housing not necessarily the starting focus. Is that right? Yes, absolutely. And actually, I mean, it's been an incredible benefit because of the manner in which the artist-led group have been able to engage with the community. They've been very positive in the way that they've engaged with the community using creative practice. But there's also been a challenge as Mid-Steeple Quarter as an entity has emerged to try and shift some of that perception with the wider community, who might have considered the project just to be a bunch of arty people creating, you know, space for their own use. So, you know, I think there's that fine line between, you know, embedding creative practice, but at the same time being able to reach the wider community in terms of perception. If that makes sense. Yeah. And just to pull in James there as well, in terms of you talked at the beginning, James, you talked about your organisation workshop. And to me, when I was listening to that, it kind of sounded a bit messy and a bit risky as well at the same time. So it's interesting how that group dynamic would set off and where you landed up. I don't know whether you can say a bit more about, well, was it messy and was it risky? I don't know, how did you feel about that at the beginning?
Yeah, it was risky, but risky in a good sense, if that, because you feel like, I think there's a tiredness in Hastings about people producing things around economic regeneration, that people see very little impact and inclusion involved in that. And that means you need to do something different and initiatives. And it did feel risky, but the risks were mediated in terms of that side of thing. We had our risk assessments to do that side of things. The unpredictable bit of it is people. You're doing a new side of something that's which has a kind of heritage, as I say, not in Europe, but in Africa and Latin America. But and as I said, the kind of testimony of people and my own kind of perspective on that sort of thing, just knowing that that was a worthwhile initiative to do. And in terms of kind of like cost benefit, the one on Marsh Farm kind of demonstrated a kind of threefold cost benefit analysis as well, based on the kind of Cabinet Office report on it. So you don't get those types of returns without doing something a bit risky. And but that isn't that the same with all kind of all sort of community engagement stuff. You don't know what's there until you kind of start to explore it and unpack it.
Yeah, thank you. Lots of heads nodding. So we've actually got so there's a challenge come out to everyone here on the session today. So on the call is Dr. Tom Archer from Shelham University, who was a lead person helping Capital Economics team to look at the value for money in England. But the challenge coming back here is about how we think we might measure that across here in Wales. So I'm going to deliberately put Joe on the spot. But maybe Joe, maybe thinking about the well-being work that was being done here in Wales as well, maybe thinking about the measurement of that. So you're on mute, I think. You're on mute. No, still can't hear you. Maybe I'll come to Kate. No.
That's better.
There you go. You're there.
I'm better. Yeah. Sorry. Can you repeat the question again in terms of the Wellbeing Act capturing?
Yeah. Shall I do it, Gary?
Yeah. Go on, Tom. Yes. Come in.
Sorry, I'm hijacking the session here with my researcher questions. Apologies for that.
Why not?
We're doing lots of evaluations in community-led housing. One big one for Power to Change at the minute, and we're actually right at that point where kind of we're designing surveys and interview guides to really try to capture the impacts in different ways from these schemes. And the one that seems trickiest is around kind of well-being, empowerment, the benefits of volunteering, that kind of, the economic impacts are kind of almost a bit easier to measure. So I'm really interested to know what you've done on that and whether there are any kind of lessons learned that we might be able to draw on.
Okay, I mean, in terms of, I guess the way we've set up our evaluation and monitoring on the Communities Creating Homes programme is to try and capture some of that work. Like you say, beyond the economic, it is looking at the value and the time people put in beyond that. So part of it we've done by the baseline surveys to try and look at from the start, and then we're measuring those on an annual basis, although one of the problems we've had is getting people to engage, which is quite often the problem with surveys, is getting the information off people at the right point to be able to measure that. We've done an initial piece of, or started an initial piece of research that's looking at the benefits of community-led housing during COVID, and whether there's anything that's really stands out that can be attributed solely to community-led housing in terms of its formation, that why people felt maybe better prepared or able to deal with the lockdown during that. So we've had about 15 responses to that so far, and the researchers are doing some in-depth one-to-one interviews, obviously by phone or Skype, to kind of look into that in a bit more detail. So yeah, it's quite difficult. Like I say, the economic is really easy to capture, but we've tried to build into the programme some processes where possible to capture the additional added value, so we can share all of the stuff that we've created, you know, with people on the call as well, if that helps.
Thank you. And I'd just like to just pull in Casey as well, because I know Keith's prompted you from a session from yesterday as well about issue time banking. Can that? Yeah,
sorry, I was writing something in the chat as well for Tom to have.
Okay.
So I'll have a quick read of the question. Am I writing time banking? Yeah, so we did talk about time banking yesterday, and I know Sarah, who was on the call with us, sent me some resources to send round to everybody that was on that call. So I think those resources that she sent me will really help in terms of measuring those wellbeing impacts. And I was actually just typing in the chat as well about the research that we did last year in terms of the wellbeing of community-led housing, and I'll pop a link in the chat to that. And that research, we spoke to over 50 different people living in community-led housing, and we found that it reduced loneliness, it helped to boost people's confidence, and to help to create more cohesive communities as well. So I'm just popping a link in the chat to that as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Casey. And James, I know you've added a bit there on the chat line. Do you want to say a bit more? I was interested to learn about, because you talked about legacy and sharing learning. I wonder how the team down at Hastings are doing that from your experience and your work.
So we've the sharing and the legacy, I was kind of talking in the context of our Heritage Action Zone, which is a 4-year project. So that is about, so an example of that, we have a strand in there that in terms of kind of cooperative kind of working, if you like, is we could do, we can bring in built fabric grants, which we disperse to property in the area. But how does that get maintained? Because that's the issue in kind of Hastings, that it's a little bit kind of ragged at the moment, and that's about a kind of a collective social capital. So that's an example of one kind of legacy. If I do that, the kind of point I was making in the chat really is our 12 Claremont building is a 5-storey building, but on the ground floor it's going to be a gallery that's run by or leased by a partner of ours, Project Artworks, who specialise in at the moment in a kind of retreat area in the town under the railway arches, working with the neurodiverse, and their ambition is very much to get the neuroverse and the neurotypical to mix together. So your gallery is your kind of point for that to happen, but it's about the activity that happens in the building in terms of the support networks for people and their families in the neurodiverse community, but having that in an integrated context. There is no facility in Hastings Town Centre in terms of toilets or anything like that for people, and we will, so that ground floor will be kind of like the advice hub that complements the artistic bit, which is the gallery. And that the point is that just widens out our, we need all the opportunities we can maximise grant coming into the building.
Okay, thank you. Just looking through the chat, and in terms of time, we're coming towards the end of our time here. Perhaps just going to back round each of our panelists, just to put them on notice now, and perhaps maybe any final words they would like to say to everyone here going forward. So maybe go in reverse order, maybe starting with Sophie there, in terms of, because you quite rightly talked about it's more than housing, it's about homes. I don't know what you would like to leave the audience
Sure.
with here. Yeah.
Oh, what would I like to leave the audience with? I don't know. That we're at a new crossroads here, obviously, where we can change how we make communities. And as Gary said in the intro, it's really important that we put out community-led housing, but also other forms of community-led businesses, organizations, everything like that, and new ways of doing things as a viable alternative to the way we've been doing it. Because it's clear, and it's been aggravated by the crisis, that the way we were doing it before wasn't really working out for all of us and not taking care of everyone we wanted to. So let's really think about the community-led projects and how they can make a new sort of paradigm as we move forward.
Thank you. Mike, top that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that the sense of crossroads that Sophie refers to seems to kind of cut across everybody's thinking at the moment. And, you know, it certainly feels like we're at that point because of an election in Scotland, because of COVID, because of new opportunities. And I think the point I would like to make is just that it's really important for us to engage with people and learn, and you know, derive sort of tangible stuff from that learning experience. And I think some of the conversations about how we measure success and impacts are really important to us. And we have found ourselves in Scotland caught in a position whereby community-led activity isn't really part of the housing thinking within the Scottish government. It cuts across other areas, and in the housing side of thinking, they measure everything in terms of numbers delivered, and that hasn't helped us at all. You know, there was a target at the beginning that's not been fulfilled, therefore we don't have a success, which is absolutely not the case. So yeah, I think that all of that is very important, and we're very keen to try and reposition that message in our context, that success is about a whole range of different aspects of knock-on regenerative community social impact, and this feels like a very good time to be thinking in those terms.
Thank you. James, I'm going to give you the last word, sir.
I hope the value of kind of bringing this all together in these type of things is my experience of our community of kind of organisations is that we're very small. We've got individually we don't have that much capacity, and we're trying to tackle quite complex issues. But the devil sometime in the detail. But we are an incredibly generous community. So anytime you want to kind of drop a line through the email or pick up the phone or get on a Zoom conversation, I think most people are willing to do that and give you some time on that. So if you want to talk through, how did you do your community investment offer? You know, where did you start? How did you do your selection process for your tenants? What affordability models are you using? Why have you chosen them? And sometimes it's just, rather than reading loads of stuff online and research, which there is a wealth of, sometimes it's just nice to kind of have a chat with people and just follow their thinking. And as I said, all the way the time I've been working in this area, I think people are incredibly generous and will give you your time. And that's one of the strengths of our movement.
Lovely. Thank you very much, James. That's a great finish there. So thank you to James and to Mike and to Sophie for all your contributions today. You've given everyone a great wealth of information there. And I can see in the chat line, lots of links are being shared with everyone. On behalf of the team at the Wales Cooperative Centre, I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. They are going to be sending out a survey. So if I can ask you, when you have your morning coffee tomorrow, just spend 10 minutes just filling in the survey for us. It ultimately keeps me happy in terms of measuring how well the Wales COP team are doing. So that's fantastic. But anyway, please carry on that conversations. And let's move the sector forward. I hope for Wales it will become mainstream. And in terms of the funding issues going forward, we will get things resolved. And that value for money piece, we carry on pushing the case and making it more publicly known that community housing is definitely an option for people for affordable homes. So thank you everyone for joining. Great to see everyone, and we'll see everyone again soon. Take care for now. Bye for now. Are we still being recorded? Are we still?
Alan can stop that.